There are fairies on the farm. My award-winning fairy fantasy novel, The Ghost of Nothing, is available now in ebook, audiobook, and paperback. Link in the description. This happened in Illinois in the late 60s. I lived in an old house with its fair share of odd occurrences. I later learned that the house sat over a spot where 3 underground streams met, deep below the ground. Maybe it was just my imagination, but on quiet nights, I could sometimes hear a faint humming, like organ music, coming up through the floors. I used to think the house had a voice of its own. One weekend, a friend from the city came to stay with me. She brought a pattern and fabric with her to make a dress for an upcoming party. We spent hours working on it together. Everything was going fine until we got to the zipper. It had vanished, completely gone. We tore the place apart looking for it, but it was nowhere to be found. Eventually, we ended up having to drive into town to buy a new one. It was frustrating because the zipper had been right there on the table next to us, and it was like it had just vanished into thin air. A couple of days later, after my friend had gone home, I was in the parlor, lost in my own thoughts. The doorway in the parlor had a small shelf on it, and I randomly glanced up and saw a little man standing there on the shelf. He couldn't have been more than 18 inches tall. His skin was brownish, and his face was very old looking, wizened. He had black hair that was messy, kind of tousled, like what you might see on a baby who just woke up from a nap. And he had these tiny, very black and shiny eyes that reminded me of apple seeds. He was just standing there as clear as day. And in his hand, I noticed, he was holding the missing zipper. "Hey!" I shouted, half in shock and half incensed that he had stolen the zipper. He looked right at me, and in that instant, he was gone. Just like that, he vanished. But not the zipper. It dropped to the floor, stretched out flat under the doorway. As you can probably imagine, I was completely stunned at what I had just seen with my own eyes. I don't know where the little man went or how he vanished. There wasn't anywhere obvious he could have gone, like a hole in the wall. And I don't know why he took my friend's zipper. All I know is what I saw. That wasn't the first time I'd noticed something odd in that house, though, but it was the first time I'd seen a physical being like that, one that could interact with actual physical objects. But I did used to sometimes see dark blue shadows darting along the walls. My toddler daughter even had a name for them. She called them the blue bamboosies. She played with them like they were her imaginary friends. Although after my experience, I wasn't so sure they were imaginary anymore. There was one other incident after that day when I saw that little man again. My daughter was playing by herself, but she was doing a lot of talking, like someone was there in the room with her. So I stuck my head into the room to check on her. My daughter wasn't alone. That same little man was standing there in her room across from my daughter, just watching her with this curious expression on his face. He was dressed a little differently this time. He wore these knee-length pants and a tunic-like shirt in cream, and he was barefoot. He seemed earthy, like he belonged to the ground itself. I only saw him for a few seconds before he looked up at me, and once again he was gone, pretty much magically. Over the years living in that house, we got used to all kinds of strange happenings. Voices joining in when I was singing, objects moving, that eerie hum from the rivers beneath the house. The little man, though, seeing him in what appeared to be flesh and blood, was the only thing that really made me feel unsettled. He was real, and it appeared a bit of a prankster. I got the feeling he got a kick out of making us search high and low for that zipper, even costing my friend a bit of money in the process. I'm 73 years old now, and I've had my fair share of experiences with the odd and the unexplainable, but nothing as vivid and real as what I experienced in that house. I've always believed in fairies. I think they're intelligent energy beings tied to the earth in ways we can't understand. As a musician, I've even collected old tunes that are said to come from the fairies. I've got at least 30 now, and they all have this otherworldly quality, like they don't quite belong to us. I wonder sometimes if fairies are drawn to music and to the energy of certain places. That house, with its rivers and the hum that they produced, might have attracted the fairies to that spot. That's my theory, anyway. And I think, as much as that little man liked to play tricks, my impression was that they weren't malicious, but that he was just curious about us, just like we were curious about him. This encounter occurred in Flushing, Queens, New York, between 1981 and 1983. I did not experience this myself. It was my husband, who was 8 to 10 years old at the time. I would like to mention first that my husband and other members of his family have experienced many strange occurrences throughout their lives. My husband's sister told me once she thought she had the sight, which she explained meant that she could see and feel supernatural type things that others could not. I believe my husband shares this ability, but he doesn't want to admit it. In his position, he stays very busy, rarely having downtime to contemplate possible supernatural gifts. He does believe in the supernatural world, but his interests lean more toward ghosts. When I told him I thought the experience he had when he was young might have been fairies, he just laughed. To get back to the encounter, my husband lived in an English Tudor home with his family and shared a bedroom with his two brothers, his oldest brother's bed being on one side of the room and the bunk bed he shared with his other brother located on the opposite side. One night, he believes around midnight, he woke up to see two dark figures in his room. He could only see their silhouettes, but they looked to be about 3 feet tall, with hair that came up in points. He said they reminded him of mini Kiss band members with how their hair looked. They were across the room from him, in a sitting area that had a couch. It looked like they were silently moving around, ducking behind things, careful not to be seen. In disbelief, my husband blinked several times, thinking his mind was playing tricks on him in the dark. When he looked back again, not only were they still there, but now another one had appeared. The third one, much closer to him than the other two, was halfway to him now. In a panic, he threw his covers over his head to try to hide, but after a few moments of nothing happening, he chanced to peek out. When he did, one of them was right in front of his face, looking at him. My husband tried to scream for his brothers, but no noise came out. He couldn't move either. He was stuck face to face with this dark figure. He couldn't see its face. It was so close to him, its features were blurred. It didn't say or do anything. It just stood there, staring at him. After a second like this, my husband was able to force himself to close his eyes, and when he opened them again, it was gone. He looked to the sitting area where the other two had been, but there was nothing there either. All three had vanished. To this day, he has seen nothing like this again. He thinks they were demons, but I think they may have been goblins or something similar. My story took place when I was 6 years old. I'm a woman born and raised in Puerto Rico. In 1996, the floor plans of my house were a little different. To enter my room, you had to enter through my parents' room and make a left, where there was just a door frame with no door. My father was gone working in the US while me and my mom stayed behind in Puerto Rico, waiting until he got financially stable enough to bring us there too. One night, I was sleeping, and I suddenly woke up feeling scared and uneasy with the feeling that someone or something was looking at me. I had a small nightlight in my room that actually made the room clear and visible the moment I opened my eyes. And I saw this leprechaun, for lack of a better word, standing there in my room. He was maybe 2 to 3 feet tall, wearing clothing that looked like the material of those old-style potato bags. The clothing was in autumn colors, a long-sleeve button-down shirt, pants, and bare feet. He had a very scary face with a big, creepy smile. And when he saw me, he laughed with a scary, mischievous kind of laugh. Then he started to throw and kick all my toys around without breaking eye contact, jumping and sort of like skipping around, mocking my fear and laughing at me. I was petrified, frozen at first, but then I managed to snap out of it and scream for my mom, crying, "Mom, Mom!" I shouted and she came for me almost immediately. But before she got to my room, the creature disappeared, like as if it went through some sort of portal. I totally forgot about this experience until maybe a decade ago. I was talking with my mom and she reminded me of it. It all came back to me in a rush. I'm glad I haven't seen that thing ever since. I'm going to be 33 this year because I never want to see something like that again. I bought this house 20 years ago, and my first impression when I walked in was that the house was smiling at me. It wasn't an old house, it was built in the 1930s, and came with a fair-sized garden with a bluebell wood, brambles, and hawthorn bushes. I'm not a great gardener and worked abroad regularly at the time, so I didn't do much with the garden. Now, the house had a few peculiar features. Doorknobs would never stay attached. Regardless of what I did, they would always come off in a matter of days. The electric seemed wonky, burning through light bulbs at an astounding pace. One evening, all the light bulbs in the house blew at the same time. And sometimes you could feel a presence watching you, or hear movement upstairs. I even had a couple of mediums come in, and they both claimed my house was haunted. However, the house was always a happy place, so I wasn't motivated to move or make any changes. My experience is as follows. I was working abroad at the time, and whenever it was time to leave for my job, my wallet, passport, and/or house keys would vanish, only to turn up in plain sight when I asked them to return them. This happened so often it became an in-joke amongst me and my family. It went on for maybe 6 to 8 years. Eventually, I had the time and money to do some work on the house, so I had the garden cleared and the insides of the house remodeled. After that, things changed in that house. My stuff stopped vanishing. The house became just a house with no special feeling of smiling, and the other impressions stopped as well. I still live there, the house is still just a house now, and I haven't felt anything or had items disappear for years, since the remodel in 2011. Those I've mentioned this to have suggested I had house fairies, brownies specifically, and that my garden might have had a population since driven off by the clearance. I sort of miss them. They brought friendly chaos to the environment. Why do I think they were fairies? The pranking nature of the experiences. I haven't thought about this particular incident in years, not until I came across your channel. What brought it to mind was some of the stories you've told where maybe ghosts and the Fae might have worked together. There was one video in particular of yours, a creepy one, where people wanted to see the ghost or fairy lights on a hill in Oklahoma and were chased off by two men that might have been ghosts themselves. A family friend from there can confirm that there is a legend about lights on that hill. She loves to tell the story of her father and grandfather that had a terrifying encounter out there while on a hunting trip in the same area. Okay, back to my story though. Back around 2007, my friends and I were all in college in the Albany, New York area. I would commute to and from school, but almost all of my friends lived on campus, and I spent most of my time there, often crashing on one of their couches. My friends, Jen, Ash, and Helen, being in their early 20s and not wanting to live in the dorms anymore, decided to find a place nearby. Most of the apartments were out of their price range. Jen mentioned this to one of her professors who just so happened to own a place a few miles away from the campus. The catch being it was in a rougher part of town and needed a little work. But if they were willing to put in some work into the place, they could stay for a reduced rent. They jumped at the chance, and I was soon recruited to help. The place was an old gray and white two-story house that had the first and second floors converted into apartments. They had the second floor as the first floor was still undergoing renovation. All in all, it was a nice place and just needed cleaning and a coat of paint. Most of the original wood floors and other woodwork was still intact. The bathroom even had an old clawfoot bathtub with a tile floor. I helped them move in and spent several nights, weekends there painting. There was some odd things we noticed, though, as we explored the house. The attic, cellar, and both apartment kitchens could be gotten to by a back staircase that could be accessed from the back door. Both the attic and cellar had padlocks on them. Also, all of the doors leading out of the apartment as well as the exterior doors had at least 3 separate locks on them. 2 could be unlocked with a key, but the third was a sliding bolt lock that could only be latched on the inside. We found it weird, but just chalked it up to the area not being that great. As my friends settled in, things seemed to be normal. The neighbors were friendly, and everyone seemed to be doing well. Myself and several other friends would stay over most weekends and a few weeknights. However, Jen and Helen would ask on occasion if anyone was going down the back stairs to the basement, or if we had seen a work truck out front, as there were supposed to be people working on the first floor. But none of us had. Helen would say that she could hear footsteps coming from the back stairs at night, and Jen would say she could hear heavy footsteps walking up to her bedroom door at night and then walking away. I'm a big guy, and they both thought that I was playing a joke on them, which I admit I was known for, but I couldn't say it was me this time. We all joked that the place must be haunted. It wasn't until later that we began to suspect that it was actually true. Each of us experienced something there. Usually phantom footsteps, the strong smells of cigar smoke when none of us smoked. On one occasion, our friend Mike opted to stay at the apartment to take a nap while we all went out. When we got back, he asked why did we have to be so loud coming up through the back stairs into the kitchen and rummage through the cabinets, only to come through the front door 5 minutes later. On telling him that we had just gotten back, and we hadn't been in the kitchen, we checked all the doors thinking that someone had broken in. All of the doors were locked, including the sliding locks that could only be latched from the inside. And we didn't find any broken windows or signs of forced entry. Things kind of went on like this. It was creepy, but it didn't seem malicious. Doors or cabinets would open and close, things would go missing from one place and turn up in another. We all just kind of accepted it, whatever it was, as just another roommate, and kind of ignored it. Until one night in January. Ash and I were working on projects in one of the computer labs on campus. Jen was at the apartment alone because Helen was staying at her boyfriend's that night. At around 9 or 10 in the evening, Ash and I got a frantic call from Jen, saying that she thought that someone was in the house. All the doors, even the bedroom doors, are rattling, and there's pounding coming from the back stairs, she said. I told her to get out and call the police. Ash and I raced over to the apartment to find Jen shivering on the street corner in her night clothes. After making sure she was all right and putting her in the car, we watched the house for a bit. The house was completely dark. It turned out Jen hadn't called the police but had called her boyfriend Mark, wanting to stay at his place, understandably refusing to go back into the house that night. Not seeing anyone exit the house while we waited for Mark, Ash and I decided to go in and check the place out once he arrived. We were nervous, so we checked around the outside of the house first. We didn't see any sign of forced entry. Plus, the back door was still locked. Once Mark arrived, Ash and I decided to go in. Mark and Jen would stay outside in the car and keep an eye on things. We decided to go in through the front, moving as quietly as we could. When we opened the door to the stairs that led up to the apartment, we both heard what sounded like children giggling. We both stopped and looked at each other. The laughing was seriously creepy and so real that I started to get mad, thinking that some kids had somehow broken in. I told Ash to flick on the light once I had gotten to the top of the stairs, wanting to catch them in the act. So I crept up the stairs in the dark. When Ash turned on the lights, I didn't see anyone, and we couldn't hear any footsteps retreating down the hall to the kitchen, which we should have heard if kids had been there. It was still dark in that part of the house, so I flicked on the next switch and ran down the hall, cursing as I went. Then I heard the kitchen door slam. I went to open it, but it was locked. I had to unlock 3 separate locks on the door, including the sliding lock, to get it open. Once I got through the door, I went down the back stairs to the outside door, only to find it was locked as well. I unlocked it and went outside through the back door. I didn't see anyone out there either. I came around to the front of the house where Mark and Jen were still waiting. I asked them if they had seen anyone come out, and they had not. We all went back inside together. Jen got some things while Ash and I checked the rest of the house. Both the attic and cellar were still padlocked, and from what we could tell, the downstairs apartment was locked as well. After Mark and Jen had gone, Ash and I stayed the night there, opening up what windows and doors we could, and we sage-smudged the entire house. We slept with the lights on, but nothing happened. After that, Jen began spending more time at Mark's, and I ended up moving in for the last 6 months of the lease, experiencing only one instance of mysterious footsteps. After we all finished up school, everyone moved out that August. I'm still not entirely sure what was going on in that house. Was it ghosts? Some kids playing jokes and entering the house through some mysterious door we didn't know about? Could it have been fairies? I guess I'll never know. Despite the creepy parts, we actually had a lot of fun in that house. Maybe whatever it was just wanted to mess with us and have some fun too. That's what makes me think it could have been fairies. the mischievous, prankish nature of it all. Well, I hope they had a good laugh. This happened in England, in Cambridgeshire, around 2018. It was a very brief encounter late one evening. My partner and I had been watching television and had since switched off the TV, and we were talking. At one point, I glanced toward the area where the television was, only fleetingly as one would while not paying any particular attention, and caught a glimpse of a small gnome-like man. Immediately, I looked again, but the entity had gone. From the brief glimpse I could see, it was almost a cross between the classical description of brownies and a gnome. It can't have been more than 6 inches tall, judging by the furniture I glimpsed it on. It had a scruffy dark brown or black beard, which seemed to be spiky and covered most of its face. No brightly covered clothes that I can remember. They were all brown or dark. But it was hard to make out details. I do recall it had a pointed hat, which was also dark in color. There were a number of rocks that we had collected on our travels on the furniture it had been sighted on, so I think perhaps it was attached to those rocks in some way. It left a feeling of being watched, but it wasn't malevolent. It's just a shame the sighting was so fleeting. It does feel like I'd glimpsed something that didn't want to be seen. This happened when I was about 3 years old. Back then, my family lived in this old house in Devon. I don't remember much from that time, but there are certain memories that stick out. I remember I used to spend a lot of time in the garden. Hours. When I got older, my mom told me I used to talk to myself when I was out there, and it looked to her like I was having a conversation with someone only I could see. She didn't think much of it until I started to demonstrate knowledge of things that I couldn't have possibly known. Like one time, I apparently told my parents I'd found wild watercress, and they were shocked, like, how did I even know what that was? They never found an explanation for it, and I don't remember this incident at all. All I remember is that I liked being out in the garden. In fact, I preferred it to being inside the house. Although in retrospect, I think part of the reason I liked being out there so much was that I was avoiding the house. The house was weird. It always felt cold, even in the summer. And sometimes I get the feeling I was being watched. There were times that I could swear that me and my family weren't the only people that lived there. I would see things sometimes, shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, and certain rooms just felt wrong. There were little things too, like doors opening on their own or stuff disappearing and reappearing in odd places. Anyway, the really strange thing, the thing that sticks out in my memory, happened this one night in the winter. I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know why, maybe I had a bad dream or something. Then I heard something, a kind of tapping sound, faint but rhythmic, coming from the hallway. I got up to see what it was. I opened my bedroom door and peeked out. There in the hallway, I saw these tiny little people marching along the picture rail like they were in some kind of parade. There were a lot of them, maybe hundreds. They were dressed in these bright red and green outfits with little pointy hats, just like something out of a storybook. And they weren't floating or flying, they were marching like a proper army. Their movements were precise, like they were on a mission. They looked like little soldiers. I was so shocked by this that I believe I fainted. I don't remember much about what happened after that. I asked my parents about the incident years later, and my mom does remember finding me asleep on the floor one morning next to my bedroom door. But I wasn't injured and there was no indication that I had fainted. So I don't know if it really happened or if it was just a dream. I do know that I've never forgotten that night. It's one of those memories that has stayed sharp, no matter how much time has passed. I've read a lot about fairies and folklore since then, trying to make sense of what happened. Were they pixies, gnomes? I don't know. But in my memory, they feel real, like they belonged to another world, one that maybe overlaps with ours sometimes. We moved out of that house a few years later, and I haven't been back. I haven't had any experiences like that since, so there's this period in my memory where strange experiences were just a fact of my life, and now they're not. I think it was that house. Like maybe it was a kind of doorway to something else. Sometimes I think about going back there and asking the current residents if they've had any experiences, but I'm worried they might think I'm crazy. Still, I keep thinking about it. It's almost like something is drawing me back there. Unanswered questions, unfinished business, fairies. Maybe one day I'll have the courage to find out. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all those who submitted their stories for this one. I can definitely relate to some of the stories in this one when it comes to missing objects. In one of Brian Froud's books, he has an illustration of a type of fairy that likes to steal objects in homes and then allow them magically to reappear sometime later. I think I've definitely got one of those following me around since I'm always losing things. I have a really quick announcement. I've decided this month to partner with a fellow fairy fantasy novelist who is launching a Kickstarter for his book, which is called Of Mages, Claws, and Shadows. It's the second book in a dark fae fantasy series, which he's pitching as John Wick with fae, which sounds pretty cool. So if you're interested in another take on the fae, this might be something to check out. There's a link to the promo in the comments. Some other fairy authors are also participating in this promotion, so all of the books, I believe, are on sale. Some of them might even be free for the month of February. The ebook version of my novel, The Ghosts of Nothing, will be participating and will be on sale for the month of February as part of this promotion. So if you haven't picked up a copy and you've been thinking about it, this is a great time. My book, The Ghosts of Nothing, is a spooky, supernatural fairy story about a girl from a haunted town that turns out to have a bigger fairy problem than a ghost problem. It's won some awards now, including being a finalist in the Independent Author Association Best Book of the Year Award, which was pretty cool. It was cool to get that recognition, and is getting great reviews. So if you like this channel, I think you'll enjoy it. It's got the same kind of magical, spooky feeling that I try to cultivate here, but in the book, I was able to explore that even further, so definitely give it a try. For a chance to win a free copy of the audio version of my book, subscribe to either of my newsletters, whether Fairy Lights, my fairy newsletter, or my writing newsletter, The Shaking Tree. I'm drawing a name randomly from my subscribers there each month for the free giveaway, and both newsletters are free to join. If you have a story to share, head over to scaryfairygodmother.com and you'll find the form that you can fill out with your story. And the links to either of my mailing lists are also there and in the description. As always, I'm sending out extra special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon and anyone who has joined the channel or made a one-time donation through PayPal or Ko-fi or become a paid subscriber to my newsletter. I really appreciate you guys so much and the support you are giving this work. If you like this channel, the stories I share here, and would like to lend your support, all the support options are in the description. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census, so thanks to everyone who submitted. The stories were edited for dramatic and narration reasons To read the census stories, follow the link in the description to the Fairy Investigation Society. Please leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. It really helps the channel so much when you do that. And hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.